That first night, we were just dripping sweat, can't see nothing, coughing, eyes are all watering, and these trees just exploding in front of me. I was horrified. I was scared. I mean, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But when we go on the fires, people treat you different. Even if they do know you're an inmate, all they see is a hardworking person that's helping them, and it feels great. Last year, we got called to this town of Saratoga, and we worked for 2 weeks. And then at the end of our stay, townspeople wanted to donate us a prime rib dinner. Now, we don't get prime rib very much here in prison. And I noticed that these people that were waiting on us in this really fancy, beautiful restaurant were like in plain Jane clothes. Well, right before we got our main course, the owners came up and they said, I want to introduce you guys to the people that volunteered to help wait on you tonight. And all these townspeople got up and gave their testimonies. And they said that we helped save their lives, and I was just overwhelmed to see it in their eyes and to hear it in their voices. It was so moving that I had to get up and go compose myself. And that was my proudest moment, hands down.
I was at school, and they called me to the office, and they told me that my brother had been murdered. And all I wanted to do was to get revenge. So I went to my grandmother's, and I had carried with me a .38 revolver, and I was crying, and she said, son, don't do this. She said, I've got one grandson dead. I don't want the burden of another grandson being dead. To be honest with you, I carried a burden of hatred on my shoulder for 10 years. I was just sick. I was aching. I would go to the doctor. The doctor couldn't find anything. But one day the doctor said, when you come next week, bring your wife with you. So the next Thursday, I carried my wife with me, and when we got in there, he started questioning her. I was having nightmares, but she never told me. I was crying in my sleep. I was calling for my brother. And then I began to realize what was happening. And the doctor told me, he said, I'm the wrong doctor for you. And when I began to forgive, there was all the answers to my illness. I didn't have to go to the doctor anymore. I didn't have those pains. But it did put a dent in my life for a long time.
I was asked to be a bishop, and there was going to be a reception for me. So I called my grandmother. She was one of these women who lived out in the ranches who would grab a rattlesnake by the tail and snap its head off. She was strong, and she raised this big family. Well, 2 or 3 days before the party, my grandmother arrives. I asked, what have you been doing lately? And she said, I've been having a good time. Wow, what do you do at 90 years old to have a good time? He says, oh, son, I've been going to funerals. I said, you have been having a good time at funerals? Oh, yes. He said, we drink coffee, we tell stories, we meet old friends. It's wonderful. We have a great time. I said, Grandma, how can you have a good time when somebody dies? She looked at me straight into my eyes, and she was serious, almost scolding me. Then she says, son, haven't you learned yet that it is a privilege to die? In all my years of study in theology and listening to sermons, I had never quite heard it that way. A few weeks later, she had that privilege. She was in the hospital, recovering from a heart attack, but we knew she probably wouldn't make it at her age. And she kept repeating like a mantra, solo quiero ver a Dios. I just want to see the face of God. That was the last thing I ever heard her say. And then she died 2 days later. When she died, she was singing songs from catechism. Al cielo, I want to go to heaven, I want to go to heaven. Songs from childhood. And she died singing. She was just an amazing woman. I'll never forget Panchita.
My mother was very tough on me because my father passed away when I was 11. So she made me and shaped me as a man, which to me was very difficult for a woman to do without a father being around. But she did a good job. she was very strict. The first time my mother told me that she actually loved me, I was 32, and growing up, she couldn't handle the household financially. So I remember many months with no lights and, being laughed at in school for wearing blue and black mismatched socks. And she would just try to compensate. She would just buy a whole lot of candles and try to make it so I can at least get dressed for school and have something to eat. When you start living off ketchup and hot water and black bean soup when it's all you can afford, you start to think, I don't want to go back to this. The jobs that she was doing, it was tearing her body down. So I was headed for the streets. I need to make some fast money. And I did. I was hustling. And I knew if she saw me, she'd pin me down. So I just avoided her. You had people in the streets say, your mom is coming. Run around the corner. But years later, I worked for the Department of Sanitation, worked for the post office, and I went to college. Now, my mother, she's in a nursing home. I go every Sunday and I take the paper and I read to her. She's blind. I remember when I was telling my mother that I got promoted, she took her glasses off like she could see. And she said one line, it all paid off. And she was right.
Santa Claus was a byproduct of truck driving. Because I drive a truck, I can have a beard that's a little bit longer than most people. And one early November, my head was cold and I didn't have a hat, so I stopped at a Walmart. They had a rack of Santa hats right inside the door, and I picked one off and I put it on my head. And a little 4-year-old boy that was walking by with his mother yanked her to a stop and said, "Look, it's Santa!" And I have not spent Christmas Eve or Christmas Day at home with my family for the last 18 years. I'm usually in a rented red convertible, and I do under-the-tree gift deliveries that are designed for children to wake up and catch me in the middle of the process. One young lady wanted me to be her new stepfather. One young lady wanted me to provide her a maid. I've gone down to Tijuana, Mexico, and done it where I don't speak the language. In fact, one year when I was coming back, this young man comes running up to the side of the car, and when he saw me, his eyes opened and his jaw dropped. I gave him a really jolly ho, 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 and I handed him this gift. And as I went across the border guard had seen me hand him something. And he looked at me and he said, "You really must be Santa, and tonight I can't possibly stop you, so go ahead." As a Santa Claus, one of the big mistakes you can make is to not believe yourself. When I walk out of the house in my suit, I cease being me. And I absolutely am Santa, and no matter whether it's a skeptical teenager or somebody that wants to yank on my beard, it doesn't matter. What matters the most to me is I believe. And Santa Claus is truly the most important thing in my life.
I worked on Wall Street for 11 years for an investment firm, and I lived a very high lifestyle. I was making a lot of money. I used to walk over homeless people at Grand Central Station when they were begging for money, and I'd say, "You need to get a job." But I lost myself on Wall Street. October 19th, 1987, the market crashed, and I was so worried I was going to get laid off. Week to week, I would watch colleagues near me just be escorted out of the buildings, and I quickly fell apart. I would be awake for days because I was using cocaine and heroin, and ended up not only losing my job, but I lost my children, my beautiful wife, and I ended up in the streets. I was a mess. I went to a bridge in Upper Manhattan, trying to get the courage up. At the time, I called it the courage to jump. And one time I stood there at the rail for about 30 minutes, trying to convince myself that this was the right thing to do. My family would be better off with me gone. And I just said, let's just get this over with. Obviously, I didn't jump. There was always some hope that maybe I can get out of this. And finally, 5 men from an AA meeting got me out of a box that I was living in the streets. And they said, "We're going to get you some help, man. The bums on the street came in and told us about you. They said, there's a kid on the street. Can you please help him? He doesn't belong there." And they came and got me. When I started my life over, I got an apartment. I had a metal chair. That was my couch. I had an upside down box from a TV set. That was my coffee table. I had a $15 voucher from the Salvation Army to buy pots and pans and forks. And I started my life over.